Awesome. All right. Welcome to another episode of still Global Tantrum because we haven't come
Look,
up with anything
man,
better yet.
until we come up with some better shit, that's what it is.
Yeah, it's Global Tantrum. I'm Steve. Galen, you're Galen. How you doing, Galen?
I'm all right, man. Still dealing with the knee rehab. My number one piece of advice to young folks is don't get old. It's terrible.
Yeah, well, it beats the alternative.
That's hard to argue with, but it's also, I have a friend that's a doctor that his like favorite quip now is medicine. It's not as good as you think it is. And
Oh yeah.
despite it being like amazing, like what they did is amazing. They
Hmm.
took someone else, a cadaver's cartilage, and put it in my knee and drilled through a bone to hook the meniscus. It's just like crazy. But every time I go in there, the swelling, they're like, they just add 3 months. Oh, that can be around for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. And then make sure to rest a lot, but always stay active.
Got it.
It's
So
like,
you're going to the wrong. What I would say about this is you're going to the wrong medical establishments. You should be going to Brazil and possibly Switzerland.
why is that?
Just some of that cutting edge, perhaps quasi illicit stem cell type stuff. I don't know.
That good stuff?
Yeah, it's Kobe, RIP. I used to fly to Germany before the
Yeah, yeah,
playoffs,
yeah. I remember that.
come back playing a lot better. I think the stakes are somewhat lower for what you're doing, but
Somewhat.
somewhat lower.
I haven't been able to play pickup in months with
That's
like
trouble.
a bunch of guys who we're not very good.
At one point, you're pretty good. We used to play. You're much better than I was. But basketball's
Uh,
not my game anymore. I'm a pickleballer like every other 40 something dad in
you
Los
and
Angeles.
everyone else, man.
Yeah,
How
it's
how how you guys doing?
we're doing good, man. We got some rain for the first time in roughly 10 months. So that's calmed down the fires and it's cleaned the air, more importantly,
Love that.
which is really nice. So I'm able to go outside and run again, which has restored my sanity or what's left of it.
I
So,
believe that. First
yeah.
time people in LA have welcomed rain, probably.
Yeah. Well, it had been 10 months, which is quite unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, we're all good here. So on the show today, we're going to talk about a couple different things. I think we're going to start out with the Gaza truce and how that's going. We were both surprised mutually that there even is a Gaza truce. We talked about that a little bit on the last show. And I don't know, are you surprised that the truce is ongoing and seemingly working so far? What do
Yeah,
you
I am. I don't think it's the end of the story, potentially even in the short term. By the way, this also goes for Lebanon, where
uh-huh.
there's some concern that the Lebanese army isn't going to be able to do the job it's supposed to do to keep Hezbollah forces away from the border. But yeah, I am surprised. In the short term, it looks like it might hold up. Like the problem is over the long term, like this hasn't fundamentally changed any realities. And so it raises all sorts of questions fundamentally about what's going to happen with the conflict going forward. And
Totally.
there I'm as pessimistic as ever. I guess to the extent when you get some sort of good news in this conflict, you've got to celebrate it. I
Yeah.
obviously welcome the ceasefire, but I'm under no illusions that we're out of the woods.
This is a permanent solution or anything. All right, we'll get into that in more detail. So that's first half of the show. Second half of the show, we're going to talk a little bit about Deepseek and what's going on with that, because that crashed the American stock market earlier this week. Seems like a big overreaction.
Real
And
quick, is that the biggest single day fall for a company? Like Nvidia lost $600 billion
probably,
in
yeah,
market
but
cap.
so proportional to the overall size of the stock market, maybe not, because the stock market has grown so much more valuable.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of arguments about whether or not Nvidia should have had that market cap to begin with. It was bloated, shall we say. AI in general as a sector was headed for some kind of correction. It's interesting that it came in the form of a Chinese hedge fund putting out a model that performs as well as the best stuff that OpenAI has out publicly while consuming orders of magnitude less energy to train. And that's what proved to be a big wake up call. I think everybody actually wised up like a day or two afterwards and decided this is actually really good news. And we could talk more about that. It's not necessarily great news, but for NVIDIA particularly, right? Because it makes their monopoly position, I think, a little bit less firm. But for the AI sector overall, it's actually good news because, hey, faster and cheaper is good when you're talking about building applications for the consumer sector, those people that actually pay you money, because eventually the AI sector is going to have to pay back all of these hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars that have been invested in building out this crazy technology and trying to develop artificial general intelligence. Okay, to what end? Is anybody actually paying
hey,
for
that's a
this?
future problem, man. That's a
Yeah,
future
yeah, no,
problem.
that's future me, right? Right now, Sam Altman and all these other guys are just, they're going around begging billions of dollars from guys like Masayoshi Son,
Can I
the
just make
SoftBank guy.
a quick, I don't know if it's methodological, just a quick point on this?
Yeah,
Beware hot takes, man. I feel like our entire society has just become, or at least like the media ecosystem has become governed by hot takes. And like
correct.
the number of comparisons I heard to this being like Sputnik or like the global balance of power has radically shifted. Like, I'm not saying it's not important, which is why we're talking about it. But like you said, within 48 hours, I think people were like, okay, like
There's
things
that
aren't that different than they were earlier in the week.
totally, there's that type one thinking and the type two thinking, right? And we're very much in a type one era. Our attention spans have been destroyed. Having small children, I can tell you that they like the idea of the attention span as is basically now like it's down to like plank time. It's no longer even like a meaningful
Like,
consideration, right? It's no longer measurable, right? And I think, yeah, I think it is society wide, and that explains lots of different socio-political phenomenon that we're dealing with, I would say, and including our president's executive orders. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that too. So, second half of the show, Deepseek, we'll get into that in more detail. But yeah, let's turn around and jump into Gaza and talk a little bit about what the truce is, how it's supposed to work in the first place, why it happened. I think those are all sort of important table setters.
why it happened is a tougher question.
It's an
Um,
important one, right?
I think it's, yeah, the key one. I think we talked about this last week a bit. The timing of it, I don't think it's a coincidence that it happened as Trump was getting inaugurated.
Right. It's a big FU to Biden, right?
Yeah, although
Because
I think there was like a Biden used like the specter of Trump coming to office as
yeah,
like a bit of coercive leverage. Like the question as to whether look, this is a ceasefire, nothing more, nothing less. Like my 2 cents on it is the Israelis are willing to do it because they want the hostages back. I don't
that's a
think
war
it,
aim for sure. Yep.
yeah, I don't think it's, I just don't think it's so much like their concern about international public opinion. I
I
actually
think
don't
that's
think.
become less and less of a concern over time. And
Yeah.
now it's relegated to tertiary
And I'm,
for
well,
them, right?
I think it might have been tertiary all along, honestly.
Maybe I like in the past when diplomatic efforts were going, we had Oslo and so on. I
Oh,
think it
I'm
actually,
talking like post 10-7.
okay.
Um,
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
yeah.
completely different. Completely different paradigm for sure.
Yeah. I think I'm just not sure how much they cared about that once that day had taken place. So
Yeah.
I think they just want the hostages back, and that's something that the Israeli public has been demanding for a while. And I think
Hmm.
Hamas is, I don't know, needs a break.
They
Like
need a break.
basically,
They need a break.
I'm under no illusions that this is altering that organization's fundamental aims.
For sure. Hamas needs a break and the Gazans need a break. God
Yeah,
bless them.
and I don't know how much this factored in because Hamas has shown itself willing time and again to sacrifice Palestinian civilian life in pursuit of their
Absolutely.
political objectives. But
Yes.
potentially, I can't imagine that their popularity is very strong right now, given what Gazans have gone through over the last year and a half. So maybe
Do do
that
we have
started.
reliable public opinion or
The
polling,
last time I checked, it was that Hamas was much more popular in the West Bank
which would
than
make
it was
sense.
in Gaza.
Yeah.
And they
So
weren't terribly popular in Gaza even before October 7th, because living in Gaza before October 7th wasn't exactly a picnic either. They had been under a blockade for 13 years at that point, something like that. Hamas, the last time
correct.
they won an election was in 2006.
Yeah, Hamas is basically well, I don't know totalitarian, but certainly one party authoritarian. And they're known for executing dissidents that they say are informers and probably informers too, right? And I remember seeing a graph of like economic growth in Gaza versus the rest of the Palestinian areas under the Palestinian Authority, like the West Bank and so on. And it's Gaza's flat to down a little bit since the blockade. And it's not like the West Bank is doing well compared to Israel, for instance, but compared to Gaza, it's like night and day. They actually have economic growth.
Totally. I don't know. The bigger thing I wanted to talk about, whether
Mm,
he fully grasped what he was saying, and I actually think he probably did. But this was sometime last week. Trump was talking to some journalists, and this gets back to, we
yeah.
discussed this a bit last week about this issue. And he said something to the effect of he wants Egypt and Jordan to take in a bunch of Gazans. He added something in there. It's a bit ambiguous. It was like either temporarily or permanently.
He used the
Uh,
phrase basically Gaza needs to be quote unquote cleaned out.
Cleaned out. Yeah.
Clean the whole thing out because it's a mess. And you look at what's happened to Gaza in terms of the Israeli military campaign, it's man, I don't know how much reconstruction it's going to take for people to be able to live. They can live there, but it's not going to be very comfortable because it's been largely destroyed.
Correct.
Yeah,
Now, what is, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but what caught a lot of attention was, even if he had said temporarily and left out the or permanently, this is probably the single biggest concern for Palestinians, that they will be driven out of the area and not allowed back in
mm-hmm.
for all sorts of historical reasons that
Mm-hmm.
make that prospect deeply troubling. Now, the Egyptians and Jordanians, unsurprisingly, basically were like, no, we're not doing this.
Nothing to do with this for a number of reasons. One, they don't want to be a party to it. Two, they don't want millions of dispossessed Palestinians on their hands, especially the Jordanians, because Jordan's a pretty small country. Egypt, not so much, right?
Jordan, too, like, it's a tricky demographic balance already because so
There's
much of the
plenty of
country is
Palestinians already
Palestinian.
there. Yeah, exactly. I remember reading a quote from maybe it was Ariel Sharon, Israeli leader, basically saying the Palestinians already have a state. It's called Jordan. I forget who that was exactly, but
There's actually like a fair, before Jordan was Jordan and it was Transjordan. Like
Transjordan.
you can find examples of that going back to the 30s.
Right.
That's a very common argument you used to see, which is the Palestinians have the whole of the Arab world to settle in. So, and then on the Egyptian side, one, the Egyptian economy is already reeling. So
Mm-hmm.
absorbing that many refugees would be disastrous economically. They've also always had a concern, hey, if we admit large numbers of Palestinians with revanchist objectives, they might use Egyptian territory as a launching off point for attacks on Israel. We
And
want
they've
no
had
part
some,
of that.
yeah, they'd end up in the Sinai Peninsula.
Yeah,
And they've had some issues with like separatists and terrorist groups in the Sinai, if I'm remembering correctly, to begin with, right? Islamists and who knows what else.
absolutely. For some time now. And then the other thing, which was, I think there was just an article about this in the New York Times, which is Assad's fall in Syria and replacement by a group that was formerly affiliated with Al Qaeda has alarmed the Egyptian leadership.
Yes,
Because
interestingly, they actually, for a short period of time, were the same country.
that's true. Deep
Yeah,
cut.
very
Uh,
deep cut. Yeah, it didn't last for long. That was Nasser, and was that
I think
prior to
it's
the Assad regime?
Yes, it was 58 to 61. I think that's right. So Assad doesn't take power till 1970.
Okay.
Beyond that, Egypt has a long history of influential Islamist groups that operate within its borders, especially the Muslim Brotherhood. You don't have to go
Yep.
back too far to find examples of the Egyptian military government being overthrown by a popular uprising and being replaced by those guys.
The Arab Spring, and then the military decided they weren't down with that. Now we have Sisi, right?
Yeah, so the idea of absorbing, especially if a lot of these are Hamas operatives or members, and adding that to the Egyptian political scene is not something that Sisi and his closest political allies would welcome.
Yep.
But I guess I'll just ask you, like, since we touched on this, I think last week, like, Trump said that, and immediately it was welcomed not explicitly as a way of getting rid of Gazans, but it was immediately welcomed by people like Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, who has called for expelling Palestinians in large numbers and retaking Gaza. Is that where you think we're headed in the not too distant future? I ask because Benny Morris, who wrote one of the more influential books on the origins of the Palestinian refugee problem, just wrote an article in Haaretz where he basically wrote, there is not a genocide happening now, but you should expect one if there's not a two-state solution. His words, not mine.
Yeah, totally. And so that touches on a few different things, right? One is one state versus two state solution, right? And I think the two state solution has never been further away since we
I
started.
agree.
Yeah, since we started talking about what that is, right? I do not see the prospect of a, a separate Palestinian state living side by side with an Israeli state that at this stage in the game for the foreseeable future.
Well, so what he wrote there, which for him in particular, right, this is a big deal. Like, I have a hard time classifying him. Some people are deeply critical, say he's too, I guess, sides with the Israelis too often. I tend to think
Mm-hmm.
his analysis is balanced much of the time. And he's
Mm-hmm.
careful in this article to say, look, there's plenty of blame to go around. He's quite critical of Palestinians as well. But
Mm-hmm.
essentially, the argument he makes is like, whereas in the past, if the sort of dehumanizing language that we see sometimes used now were used within Israel, it would have been called out. He no longer sees that being the case, either from the political leadership or from most Israelis. And I
Yeah.
think he says the same thing on the Palestinian side. But the fact is, the Israelis are the ones with the ability to shape events. And so
Yes.
what I took away from it is he thinks it's going to happen. He basically says there will be some kind of a pretext and that will be used. And
Well, let's talk about the one state solution, right? Hamas is interested in the one state solution, that state being Palestine and not Israel. And the Israeli one state solution is so called Greater Israel, right? Which encompasses Palestinian areas. So, what happens to the Israelis or contra the Palestinians in either one of those futures? Do we think that there's going to be some kind of pluralistic democracy
no,
as part of a one state solution on either side? No. The Hamas has been very clear about what their one state solution entails. It's the expulsion of the Jews, push them into the sea, right? Or whatever. Get rid of them. And we are starting to see more and more rhetoric around that from the Israeli side explicitly. And
yeah. And just to make the historical point, look, if you look at the map of the original UN partition plan in
mm-hmm,
1947, which divided the area into an Arab state and a Jewish state, like, the map is comically awful. I don't know how they came up with it. It's like,
randomly throwing darts,
I
like
mean, it's like the two states intersect at multiple spots, and I guess the idea was like, if you did it that way, it would force them into an economic arrangement, which would help facilitate peace.
uh,
But be that as it may, like, they recognized at the time, like, that's not going to work, and so we need to partition the area into two states.
mm-hmm,
Like, it has gotten only more worse and more hopeless in the intervening decades. So I see
Yeah.
zero prospect that the one state solution is going to work.
Well, so the two-state solution is not going to work. And the one-state solution, it's like the one-state solution can work, but like under what circumstances, right? And we've over the course of decades, we have moved towards circumstances where it becomes more and more possible for something like that to happen. I think the Israeli public is now willing, ready, and able to countenance it. And I think the international community can't do anything about this, and it is not going to. And the last remaining check is really the United States. And if Trump is now floating it as a potential solution, then that's your last remaining check falling by the wayside. Do we think that in response to this, we would have a fifth Arab Israeli war?
I just don't know what that looks like.
It looks, yeah. Can anybody in the neighborhood stop Israel from doing this if they want to?
I don't
Maybe
think so.
maybe Turkey, but they're not going to, right?
Turkey's not going to go to war with the Israelis. They would
Yeah.
obviously be very critical, and I'm sure they would take some steps to absorb Palestinian refugees and rake Israel over in the press. And
Sure.
I don't know, maybe might make life difficult for the United States within NATO or something like that, although that might be hard to do as well.
Well, they're already doing that. They're already on the United States shit
Yeah,
list
that's true.
inside of NATO. So,
But look, Egypt and Israel have been at peace for almost 50 years now. And while there's a deep reservoir of sympathy for the Palestinians among Egyptians, like back in the 70s when the peace treaty was signed, well, if you talk to Egyptians, they'll tell you like one of the quips was, yeah, the rest of the Arab world is perfectly willing to fight the Israelis to the last Egyptian.
right.
Like it wasn't terribly popular to be shouldering the burden then. And the current political leadership in Egypt has no interest in doing that.
Well, they just fucking lose anyway. Like Egypt would lose, Saudi Arabia would lose, Iran has been beaten effectively. They can't do anything.
Hezbollah's been beaten. Syria is a total mess. Jordan wants no part of it. The Saudis, aside from the geographical challenges, can't do it and don't want to do it. Ditto for the Emirates. Like the Iraqis are a shadow of their former selves. And even then, back in the early 90s or even the 80s, like I think Israel wins that conflict pretty handily. So in terms of military capabilities, I don't see much there. Like the checks are, as you say, the United States,
Israeli public opinion and Israeli politics, and we see which direction that's headed. And then the American alliance, and that's it.
So well, I guess if you buy, this gets back to the international public opinion point.
Yeah.
But if it's as bad a scenario as we are contemplating, is that something that most Israelis are like, yeah, we can live with that?
I don't know. I don't know. There is an Israeli left and a Jew left.
Not much of one.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. Like, what the hell has happened to those guys? Obviously, there was the October attacks, right? And are they on board now as a result of that?
So there's one thing to be doing what has been the status quo more or less for the past quarter century.
Yeah.
And then there's mass expulsions and
let's call it what it is. It's ethnic cleansing.
Okay, which again, Benny Morris is using this term and he's not a super left-wing guy. So if it's that, those are two different things. What I will say is like
mass expulsions versus ethnic cleansing. How are those two different things?
No, I'm not saying they're different things. He uses the word genocide.
I don't think it's genocide. I don't know about that. That involves mass killing, right?
So what are we talking about? Like just if the Jordanians and the Egyptians are refusing to take refugees, like what, you're just going to expel. But in the West Bank and Gaza, there's something like 6 or 7 million Palestinians. That's not a number that the Lebanese can absorb by any means, especially since their political system is especially broken and sensitive. It's not going to work in Syria.
Where do they go? and under
Yeah.
what circumstances. Yeah. And yeah, and then there's also Gaza versus the West Bank, and whether we're just talking about Gaza or we're talking about the whole fucking thing.
Right.
And we should probably also talk about what's going on in the West Bank now.
Look, well, here, I'll let you take the lead on it.
Yeah, so we have a truce in Gaza that seems to be holding, and the Palestinians are, in fact, moving back into northern Gaza, from what I have read and what I can tell. The Israeli military is still there, but it does seem as though they are pulling back. Aid is coming into Gaza. Meanwhile, shit is kicking off in the West Bank. So there's Israeli settler violence against the Palestinians. Hamas is also in the West Bank. I'm not exactly sure what's going on with Hamas in the West Bank, but do you know more about that? There's
I mean,
violence in the West Bank, and it's increasing.
so I guess my question is, yes, there's been a spike recently, but I don't view the situation as all that different than it was, whether it's in the last few years or over the long term. Yes, after the ceasefire was signed, we saw things increase a bit. But if you think back to the months immediately before October 7th, so this is like summer of 2023,
Yeah.
there was all sorts of articles about this exact dynamic already happening in the West Bank. This is not something that people study the conflict were surprised about, but for
Mm-hmm.
people who are interested, I think it was like last spring, the New York Times Magazine put out an article called The Unpunished, where they talk about the long history of settler violence
Mm.
in the West Bank. This is why people like Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir being in Netanyahu's government is concerning, that these
Mm-hmm.
guys have direct ties to a lot of the right-wing settlers in the West Bank. Like, none
Mm-hmm.
of this is new by any means. And
But is it accelerating? And is the IDF now abetting it?
yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying is, I guess actively abetting is one thing, but they were looking the other way, turning a
For
blind
sure.
eye for years,
Yeah.
which that article covers really well, in my opinion.
And in
So,
the 90s, they weren't. The IDF was actually, and Israel they were actually stopping the settlers and removing settlers.
well, and especially for, in Gaza in 2005, Sharon, who you mentioned, was in power when those settlers were forcibly removed. The problem
Yep.
now, which is a point that I think more people are waking up to, but this was a concern even during the 90s. So
Mm.
let's say for a second that whatever, we wake up tomorrow and the planet has turned upside down or something, and like a peace deal is at hand between Israel and the Palestinian Authority for a
Wow.
two-state solution. All right. Like, even if that's the case, what are you going to do about all of these settlers, even if you have an Israeli government willing to take action to forcibly remove them? Like, there's
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of them now. They all have military experience. Many of them are well armed.
Very well
Uh,
armed.
it's metastasized. And even back in 1993, when Yitzhak Rabin was prime minister, you can read about this in various sources, that like US officials would ask him, hey, if this happens, what are you going to do about the settlers? Isn't this going to spark like a civil war?
Yeah.
And he basically was confident he could handle it because he
At that
was,
time.
well, at that time, and because it was him, right? Like, arguably
Yeah.
the most decorated military hero in Israel's history, with tons of allies within the military. The situation's totally different today.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
They've grown by 10x or more,
yeah.
right? Because, yeah, a lot of the settlers are also Orthodox Jews. They have huge families, and some of them don't have military training, right? Because they don't serve in the military. That's been a point of concern, I think, within Israeli society. But they are for sure heavily armed.
They're
And if
not
they have,
all ideological, by the way.
no,
There are large percentages of settlers who are not. But yeah, evicting a lot of these people, there's people who theorize it would spark a civil war in Israel.
yes. Is this Israeli government going to fight a civil
No,
war against this right? Not a chance. It is a
no.
right wing government. Yeah. So it would require a very left wing Israeli government, a militant left wing Israeli government, and it would require the Israelis fighting a civil war, which it just isn't going to happen,
And
especially now.
I think it's worth just stating, like, one of the reasons we are where we are is after the negotiations in the 90s and early 2000s collapsed,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe we could do a whole episode on that. That is when the second intifada broke out.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas the first intifada is typically viewed as a kind of grassroots, it was a movement that had a lot of sympathy internationally
For
and really put the Israelis on the defensive. The second intifada had a very different effect internationally, and certainly within the United States and especially within Israel. The peace camp
well,
in Israel never
there was the
recovered
bus
from
bombing,
that.
yeah, the bus bombing campaign and stuff like that. Yeah, it wasn't so much kids throwing rocks anymore as like really highly trained terrorists killing a lot of civilians.
And
Um,
I think the number is something like 5,000 Israelis died in that 5 year period from '01
mhm.
to '06. Then you get the Hamas takeover in Gaza
Right.
and basically total stagnation since then. So this is
Mm-hmm.
to say, like, when you say there is an Israeli left, yes, but it's pretty
Yeah,
small.
it's small. It used to be like Israel used to be a like left-wing socialist state. And there's still like trappings of that. Like when it comes to policy in their near abroad and in their backyard with the Palestinians, I think it's just gone,
Well,
especially after October 7th.
I guess it's all to say, like, when I heard Trump made those remarks, yeah, like I don't like to say it. It's not a pleasant thing to contemplate, but I have to think that's the most likely outcome at this point.
The question is, what's the timing?
That's hard to say.
Yeah, what's happening right now is, I think, counterpoint to what we're positing, because Palestinians are actually re-entering Gaza Strip. So are they then going to steamroll them out of there? It would have been easier to just keep them out, right? But I don't think they were prepared. And they certainly were waiting for, they would have needed to wait for a signal from the American administration, which has now come.
Well, I guess
So,
another way of thinking about this is what kinds of things would have to happen for that not to be the outcome. And
yeah,
I see the world as it is.
we try
Like,
to, right? Yeah.
and it's hard for me to come up with a series of steps that doesn't lead that. The other one that might be more likely is just like a continuation of this awful status quo. And
Well, maybe, but the status quo is, it's a hot truce, right? After a series of attacks on both sides that have permanently destroyed the old status quo, I would argue. I don't think there's any going back to whatever was happening prior to October 7th. This sort of like long drawn out glide path away from Oslo. I think that's just been interrupted and destroyed. And we're now in this new paradigm that is basically in either active or inactive state of war. And when you're in a state of war and both sides agree that you're in a state of war, that opens up entirely new possibilities for resolving it. And you may be right. It's, you can suspend this state of war for some period of time, right? But like some kind of like, it would require some kind of comprehensive peace deal.
yeah, well,
And there,
that I don't think is going to happen.
yeah, I don't see that happening from Hamas's direction, and I don't see it happening from the Israeli direction, unless like the right wing turn somehow reverses itself. But Netanyahu is ensconced. He's more in charge now and more popular now than I think he's ever been, even though October 7th happened on his watch.
Correct.
And people mostly aren't talking about that anymore because of the series of military victories
Yeah, look, the guy has been in office now.
on
Think
and
about
off for
this.
30 years, right?
So I think if with his first term in the 90s, he's been in power for 18 years total, which
Out
is,
of the last 30.
yeah.
Yeah. So you want to talk about transformational? He's arguably been the most important leader in Israeli history.
Oh, I would make that argument forcefully.
Yeah. Okay.
I think most people would have said Ben Gurion for a long
Sure.
time, Israel's first prime minister. but he had his like Michael Jordan first retirement thing in his prime in the early 50s.
I'm picturing Ben Gurion on the basketball court.
He's so not athletic looking, even leaving aside his that he was like in his 60s or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I think he was in power for about 13 years. Like Netanyahu has sailed past there and had a more transformative effect on Israeli politics, society, the peace process, Israel's position in the world,
Yeah.
I would argue.
Yeah. And he's certainly in charge now. So maybe that is what we're headed for. I don't know. I don't know what the schedule would be, but I certainly agree that it is a real possibility and maybe the most likely possibility at this stage of the game. And that's like frightening. Talk about a paradigm shift. That would really underline the fact that we've entered a new world that is very different from the world that we've grown up in.
Look, I do want to take a second to point there is some serious continuity here. Like one of the reasons I don't want to teach this stuff anymore is just it's all depressing. It's all depressing all the time.
And people fucking get after you from both sides.
Well, yeah,
like,
but like
no matter what you say, we're gonna put this on YouTube and probably get all kinds of hate speech from both sides.
Well,
would be my guess.
Unless no one watches it.
Unless nobody watches it.
Look, just some self-awareness. No, but look, like I'm not going to retrace the entire history of the conflict here, but
yeah,
as I said, there was a reason that the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP, decided to come up with partition in 1948. Even before that, when the British were the mandatory, i.e. colonial power in the region, they saw the writing on the wall in the 30s and they had partition proposals of their own. Like the other thing here is like none of these substantive issues are new. No. Like in the slightest, even leaving aside that there were wars fought in the late 40s, Suez Crisis in 56, the 67, 73 wars, Israel's Lebanon war, and all the conflicts we've been talking about over the past few decades. Like substantively, everyone has known for a long time what a peace settlement would have to look like. Like we all know the basic contours. Like the negotiations are essentially going to have to be on like the margins of a few percentage points on territory, like a few percentage points on which settlement blocks Israel will get to keep in exchange for which land swaps. Like
we got to that point. We got right up to the edge, right?
I don't think we were as close as people think we were.
Okay. Yeah, arguably.
That's actually like my next paper. And I was like reading a little bit about it this morning, the 2000-2001 talks. Like at Camp David, the second Camp David summit in July 2000, they really weren't that close. We can talk about literally the last month of the Clinton administration, how close they were. They're certainly closer than they were now.
Oh, yeah.
But like it was abundantly clear, or should have been abundantly clear then, what a settlement was going to have to look like. And they weren't able to do it. And in the meantime, the most radical actors on two sides, and I don't want to hear any shit about how Hamas will do a two-state solution. Like it's, I can't believe people are still making the arguments.
No.
Like, the argument has been decisively proven incorrect.
Yes.
If you're trying to be like, oh, like Meshal, the former head, is like more moderate than Sinwar. Yeah, Sinwar masterminded the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust.
Yeah.
These are not moderates.
Low bar, right? Low fucking bar. Yeah.
And we've covered the individuals in the Israeli government. So
yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is with a brief glimmer of hope, you saw this in the 70s, it didn't happen. There's this brief period in the 90s where I actually don't think we were as close as people think we were.
Yeah.
And even if we were, all of that's out the window. So it's hard to find moments of optimism if you study this dispute. And in that sense, that broad sense, there's more continuity here than discontinuity.
Yeah, and at a certain point, historically, you look at situations like this, because there have been situations like this. There have been conflicts that have dragged on for generations. And eventually one side wins, and that's it. Right? And
I'm going to bring up an article you and I both find infamous.
yeah, give
But
war a chance.
yes, you got it. Edward Lutwak, that fucking
well,
guy.
well, so he likes to talk about it prescriptively.
Yeah.
He's, oh, this could be a good thing. Well, let's rip the band-aid and finally get it over with. That's pretty fucking controversial. We're saying, like, empirically, whether you think this is a good thing or not, this is what fucking happens. Whether you like it or not, eventually one side is going to win decisively. And what that looks like and whether people like that doesn't matter. It's just how history works. And we've seen it over and over again. And it is occasionally accompanied by mass expulsions, ethnic cleansing, full on genocide. Doesn't have to be, but that has happened historically. We've actually stood by while it's happened in places like Rwanda, right? And we've also intervened in places like the Balkans, right? So
the United States also owes much of its geographic expanse
yes
to participating.
Thank you for reminding our audience and myself that in fact we expelled and arguably committed genocide against the Native Americans. Maybe not so arguable, right?
I guess like the one thing that I'm like it's just, even for a sort of cold realist like myself, it's like hard for me to wrap my head around that it would be something that blatant. Now, like, I haven't been back to that part of the region in some time, like since the tail end of the George W. Bush administration, I'm a little embarrassed to say. So things have certainly changed since then. But I remember, like, even then getting the vibe, but more importantly, like having read and talked to people who have been more recently, that what you get the sense of being in the West Bank with checkpoints and roads cut off and like access, like things to water, that one gets the sense that the goal is to make it as hard to live there as possible.
Totally.
So that you voluntarily leave.
Yes. And then where do you go, right?
Well, but also I just don't think, like, anyone who knows anything about Palestinian history and nationalism and the legacy of the first Arab-Israeli war in 47 to 49, like, I don't see them leaving voluntarily. Like, it's just too loaded of an issue. And this is also their home. Right. So I don't see that happening. And it's just hard for me to wrap my head around a very blatant and violent expulsion but as you said, we have seen it many times in history.
Let's dig into that a little bit by exploring a counterfactual whereby we ask ourselves, what is the kindest, gentlest one state solution look like on the part of the Israelis?
Does it have to be a realistic one?
No, but look, there's lots of Israeli Arabs. We know that to be the case.
20% of Israel proper's population.
Yeah, and they vote in elections. They have their own political party. They're probably discriminated against. I don't know. I don't know enough about Israel to be able to say, but like
that's my sense, especially more recently, things like revoking Arabic as a national language, economically fewer opportunities. That's my sense as well.
Okay, yeah, but they are Israeli citizens, even if they're second-class citizens. So we also know that lots and lots of Palestinians, at least at one point, worked regularly in Israel. And I think that's been getting shut off progressively for a long time and is now completely shut off. But there are plenty of Palestinians that are apolitical and just want to live their lives and have jobs and make money. Perhaps they could be led into Israel and be vetted properly, made Israeli Arabs, right? Given citizenship. Everybody else who's not willing to sign up for that, they are moved elsewhere. Israel subsidizes creation of new areas for them to live, maybe gives them aid. I don't know. I'm like grasping at straws here, right?
Yeah, like I don't see any of this happening.
I don't see any of it happening either, but it frames the parameters of what we're talking about.
Look,
right?
The problem with the one state solution, my lefty liberal in me, which is oftentimes in conflict with my international cold-blooded realist side,
right. Like, the guy who knows how history works.
Yeah, would love to think there's a world in which, like, we all get along within the same borders and everyone has equal rights and equal representation. And like the problem with that is a couple things. Like one, as you said, Hamas would love nothing more than a one state solution because like
Yeah.
when they use the term one state solution, that's barely coded for Israel not existing anymore. And Israel's whole reason for being is that it is a Jewish state.
That was created after a Holocaust of Jews.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so like the demographics of the Arab Palestinian population going beyond 20%, going radically upward, is just not going to fly with them, which is why in every negotiation going back decades, the issue of what you do about Palestinian refugees is always one of the major final status issues.
Yeah, no right of return. Right.
Or at the very least, a quite limited one. We're arguing about numbers and whether Israel should acknowledge its part in what happened in 1948, 49. Yeah, I just don't see it. So as often happens with this stuff, I feel like I've reached a cul-de-sac. But Trump saying
what we're talking about, yeah, that was stunning. That was stunning, and it underlines the fact that we are well out of the paradigm post 1945, right, whereby everybody made a good faith solution, or at least the United States tried for long periods of time to solve this problem in a way that was internationalistic, that respected human rights, that satisfied ethno-nationalists' desires for national determination. And now it's just, he's, well, fuck it. This place is destroyed. I like the Israelis better than the Palestinians. And like, just do it. Just do it.
Look, if I were trying to put the best face on what he said, which I'm reluctant to do.
Sure.
But I am extremely critical of U.S. peacemaking efforts, particularly since 1967. I just think it's been one massive screw up after another.
But there were efforts, and so there was a process.
There were efforts and there was progress, but the United States has always been much more partial to the Israeli position. Yes. I don't think that's anything controversial to say in the slightest.
No, it's just true.
and has missed a number of opportunities, I would argue, to make more meaningful progress on this. Mm-hmm. More importantly, with the exception of 6 months at the very outset of the Obama administration, like the US gave up on this a while ago. Mm-hmm. Like somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 years. The whole like second term Obama thing, I think, was just a charade. It went nowhere. Done, Kerry had no support from Obama. I think Obama had washed his hands of it since then. Mm. Like, in a sense, Trump is like being more honest about this.
Sure. And if you think about the first Trump administration, if I'm remembering correctly, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner,
he read 25 books, Steve.
He read 25 books and he's, I've got it. All right, here's the deal. Palestinians, you could be part of the Abraham Accords, right? Which was the deal between Israel, was it Morocco?
The UAE, Morocco, Sudan, and Bahrain.
Okay, that's who we've got so far. And maybe more will sign up over time. We'll see. October 7th and the Gaza war has put paid to that for the time being. But yeah, Kushner did offer the Palestinians a deal, and it was a shitty deal. And our mutual friend and professor, John J. Mearsheimer, always admonished for the peace process for offering the Palestinians a bunch of like a Bantustan, right? Which is another way of saying like a non-viable state. And that's exactly what this was.
So look, here's again, I hate all of this. Like, it's all so depressing and upsetting, but like putting the best spin on it again, like I showed the Trump map to one of my colleagues.
Yeah. It looked like Swiss cheese, right?
So correct. It turns the West Bank into Swiss cheese. Then there's like a road across like the Negev desert in southern Israel, and then like carves out part of the desert that no one had ever contemplated being part, and all in the desert where there's no resources or like quality land, basically. And I was struck by what he said, though, which is, isn't this kind of where we're at, though? If you look on the map of where Israeli settlements are in the West Bank, like it's hard to envision a map like that unless you're going to forcibly. And as we were saying, that's going to
Not
be
going to
really
happen.
hard to do, and I view it as
Yeah.
unrealistic.
And certainly the first Trump administration had zero interest in doing that. They relocated the United States Embassy to Jerusalem, which was
Correct.
emblematic of their overall attitude towards the conflict, right? So,
Hey,
yeah.
look,
And
if I'd only known that you only had to read 25 books to solve this, I would have volunteered myself years ago as the
read about,
decisive envoy.
yeah, at least 10 times and probably more than that. And oh, by the way, you've written one or several, right? So
I wrote one, edited another, but
there you go.
you know, I
So I
think
would say
my readership rivals our viewership.
yeah. But what you just said is interesting. You're like, he came up with a plan that acknowledges reality. It just was a non-starter. Yeah. So another thing Kushner said was like, it's not going to get any better than this. It's just going to get worse. And that probably acknowledges reality too, especially now that Trump is back, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
he's saying these things. So like there is a part of me that's like Biden was still doing the whole charade thing,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah. We're going to do
Yeah,
this
we're going to
kabuki
get
theater.
2 states. Like,
No, you're
really?
fucking not.
Tell me about that. How's that going to happen?
Yeah.
So
There's absolutely no reason to think that. Like the Palestinian Authority is moribund. You can't negotiate with Hamas. The Palestinian people are trapped in the middle. Because I honestly, fervently, really do believe that there are millions of Palestinians that are just like normal people, right? They're not religious fanatics. They're not,
of course,
yeah, they're not secular fanatics either. They just want to live and they're stuck. And
correct.
yeah, and that's awful.
And this will require more explanation at another point, which unfortunately means we'll have to talk about it more. But there's plenty of blame to go around.
Yeah.
I can show you all sorts of documents where like the Israelis passed up some real opportunities.
One could call this the quintessential human fuck up
Yeah,
that has gone on for thousands of years. And
that's actually like one of the arguments at the end of my book is just like, you were wrong, you were wrong, you were wrong, you fucked this up. Like everyone just made bad decisions.
yeah, terrible decisions, but it is very human. And it is something we've seen over and over again in history. This idea of irreconcilable difference, right? And indivisible issues and no bargaining range, right? And I think that characterizes where we're at now.
So the last thing you said, and maybe this is a good spot to transition, but I agree. I no longer think there is any negotiating overlap. Like I don't think there is a mutually acceptable outcome.
So you take that and then you acknowledge that one side has 98% of the military power.
Correct.
And what do you think is going to happen?
That's basically what Morris said in that call. I think that's how he finished the column was like,
yeah,
the Israelis are the ones with the guns. So I think
that's
we know
it.
how, yeah.
Yeah. Unless Russia or China starts arming the Palestinians in a very real way, which they
won't. Because that I view that as, oh, you want to get more involved in the Middle East?
Like... No chance. Yeah. But that's the kind of thing it would take, right?
Yeah.
It would take another superpower. And look, the Soviet Union was involved in the Middle East in the past, heavily.
Correct.
We don't need to get into that, right?
No.
Russia's not the Soviet Union, and neither is
I'm trying to move past that book.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Moving on. All right. Let's put a bow and a pin on Gaza for now.
But we are on the topic of depressing issues. So I did want to ask you how you feel about the news that De'Aaron Fox wants to play for the San Antonio Spurs.
Motherfucker. This, like, I've been a Sacramento Kings fan since I was 8 years old, and I'm now 43.
I didn't know it was that long standing, man. So you've lived through some real tough beats.
I've seen some shit. In fact, one could argue that I've mostly seen shit.
That's correct.
The United States the United States. I'm still stuck on the last conversation. The Sacramento Kings have had only a small modicum of success in their existence as a franchise, which is more than 40 years old now, which is crazy.
So I will say, at the risk of alienating all potential listeners in your current city of residence, Game 6, 2002. Absolute travesty.
Yeah,
What was that
fucking
fucking
fixed by Tim Donnelly.
Tim Donaghy? Yeah, that was the
Yeah,
guy.
Donaghy. Yeah, yeah. Fuck that guy. And yeah, we don't need to get into how I feel about the Lakers. Hi, Lisa. My sister's a big Lakers fan. And RIP Kobe. I didn't like Kobe, but I'm sorry he's dead. Anyway, we can move past all of that.
Okay.
De'Aaron Fox is the best player we've had since Chris Webber, and I think by the end of his career might end up being the best player we would have had. It no longer looks like he will finish his career in Sacramento.
He's also so fun to watch, man. I love that guy's game.
Yeah, he's just a phenomenal athlete and like a good person. And we watched him grow up. He came in with the crazy hair and the crazy drives. Nobody could stop him. And he's only gotten better and better. And he plays in Sacramento, so he doesn't end up on all-star teams. Nobody gives a fuck about Sacramento unless we have a good team. And we made it to the playoffs for the first time in, was it 17 or 19 years, 2 seasons ago.
That's the thing, man.
Yeah.
I think he's looking at it. And yeah, in 2023, they grabbed the 3 seed in the West. And it was like,
Yes.
oh, like this might be the start
This
of
is
something
legit.
special.
Took the defending champs to 7 games.
And Steph had to score 50 in game 7 to win
Yeah.
that series.
And Fox was playing with a broken finger. He breaks his fingers a lot.
Oh, right. Yeah, I forgot that.
Yeah, he has another, just like if you look at his pinky right now, it's at a right angle to his hand.
Oh,
and like he's tough as hell on top of everything else that he does. He got new representation in the form of Clutch Sports, and those guys are known for getting superstars out of town if they want to leave, right? And Davis, yeah. Fox apparently wants to go play with Victor Wembanyama, which I fully understand, in Texas.
Yeah,
Fox is from Texas.
I get wanting to play with Wemby, man. And if those two are together, that's a problem.
Watch out. Watch out. And so here's the thing that I'll say. What I will say is the Kings also have Malik Monk and DeMar DeRozan. And so they can cover for Fox's absence. Malik Monk is...
They've also got Sabonis.
And they have Sabonis, right? Yeah. So there is a way for them to come out of this and land on their feet, I believe. They are guard heavy, and they were talking about trading 1 or 2 guards to get somebody big, right? Because they're undersized. It sucks that it will have to be Fox. Then they won't have to pay Fox. They can then start Keon Ellis, who's their best defensive player. Monk is a very capable lead guard.
I love Monk's game. And
he's not as good as Fox, but
I can't believe he didn't start for 2 years. I was like, what are they doing?
Yeah, it's crazy, right? But like, he was one of the best 6 men in the league. Now he's starting. He's fucking awesome. He can play even more and do even more than he's doing. DeMar DeRozan has replaced much of the clutch scoring that Fox did. So it's people think the Kings will go back to being a laughingstock, being terrible, rebuilding. That is certainly possible, depending on what this deal ends up looking like. However, I can see a way through this where they actually land on their feet and maybe even improve. If they're able to get a few good pieces, a few good players, and then draft picks, then this becomes more interesting. But like, how competent is their front office? That's always the question. And the answer is, we thought that we had gotten to a point where we had a competent front office, but given what's already happened this season with Mike Brown and everything else, we have one of the worst owners in professional sports in the form of Vivek Ranadive. It seems like he never stops interfering, right? And he'll probably interfere in this and fuck everything up, and we'll end up back in the wilderness. But you know what? If that's what happens, fuck it. I'm used to the wilderness. I grew up there. You merely adopted the darkness. I was born there.
Well, no, as a point of optimism before we get into Deepseek.
Yeah.
It sucks to lose a guy like that. That guy's so likable too, man. He's electric to watch.
And he's a good guy. He's a family man.
Well, so look, he did it as nicely for the Kings as he could. Like, better
he's been
now
like, I need better players on this team. I want to compete. And you understand that. You get that, right?
And he also did it like before he became a free agent, and they couldn't trade him and get something back. Like, they might be able to get a lot of, like, San Antonio, if they end up dealing him there, and I don't know if they want him. San Antonio has a lot of picks.
A
So
lot of picks. They have some good players. If the Kings get Stephon Castle back,
if they
right?
get Cass, I don't think San Antonio is interested in dealing that
No,
guy.
but
But that would be
they have Sohan too, and
yeah,
Sohan's a
yeah.
very
They've got some
skilled defensive
pieces.
player. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can see a way through this. If the Kings can then get, let's say, Castle and somebody else and 3 draft picks, that's not the end of the world. It's really not. Or if they can get Sohan and 4 draft picks or whatever, maybe both sides want to do that
All
because
right,
that
man.
immediately, yeah. But I'm
I'm
grasping at straws. It's like the last conversation we had. What's the best case scenario for what this could look like? Because I'm an optimist. I have to get out of bed somehow every day and
Well,
continue to watch my
I
team.
guess what I'll say to you, man, is I'm a lot more optimistic about the future of the Sacramento Kings than I am about the Middle East. So
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, no. Sacramento continues to grow and is a much nicer city than when I grew up there. It's under acknowledged. And it's also not a team that'll ever go into the luxury tax. So, you know,
all right,
anyway,
man. Tell me
yeah,
about
Deepseek. All right. So, laying out what Deepseek is, y'all may have noticed that the stock market crashed earlier this week. That's because the stock market is largely now built around basically 6 or 7 massive companies that are all involved in AI, particularly NVIDIA, Meta, Tesla, Microsoft, right? They all have massive exposure, are spending hundreds of billions of dollars, like literally hundreds of billions of dollars, investing in getting AI up and running because it's the next big thing. And arguably, it's already here. I use it every day. And I'm using it more and more interesting ways. Like, I love it. And I also understand how and why it is coming to replace everybody's jobs because I think that my own job has been replaced by it. Yeah.
how so.
Well, I got laid off almost a year ago and I've been looking for jobs in product management since then. And they're few and far between. And it's like they're getting even fewer, right? And I think about this and I'm like, oh, it's like you need product managers if you need engineers. And if you have good AI coding, which we now do increasingly, then you need fewer engineers. So the dots connect very directly. But then I'm like, oh, like I'm my own product manager and now I don't need engineers and I can actually just use these services myself and code my own stuff. So I'm actually pretty excited about it. A lot of other people are much less excited about it, which I understand, particularly if you're in any kind of creative industry. Because these models are trained on arguably stolen corpuses of creative work.
Huh.
Yeah, that's still playing out in the courts. Anyway,
Well,
that's
I'm
none
going to
of.
take the opportunity to use a tenure line, which is never met someone with tenure who didn't need it.
Yeah, there you go, right? And you are a tenured professor of international relations. Congratulations on that, by the way.
Hey, appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, you paid your dues, man. All the
I,
dues got paid. I watched it happen.
Look, I'm very lucky. Love the gig I've got. It wasn't easy to get there, but
No,
nevertheless, for the
I took
most
a
part,
look at what was required and what you were doing, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and opt out. I got
yeah,
my doctorate, and I will stop there. Thank you.
PhD stands for pretty horrendous decision. As it
Risk
works out.
adjusted, unless you actually make it to the other end as a tenured professor of international relations at Williams College, which you have done. So
Very lucky. Didn't seem
you,
that way.
yeah, you've reached the pinnacle. But I looked at the mountain and I was just like, that seems tiring. I don't know. And I think I had kids around that time, so didn't seem practicable. Anyway, back to DeepSeek.
Back to
A
Deepseek.
Chinese hedge fund has launched its own model that is just as good as the hottest, greatest stuff, most expensive stuff from OpenAI, which is seen as the bleeding edge in American AI technology. And they've done it open source and they've done it for dirt cheap, which is a huge deal. Why is it
Can
huge?
you explain why the open source part is a big deal?
Yeah, because anybody can download this model and use it themselves. They can tune the model to do whatever they want it to do. And the model is remarkably capable. It has the capability of OpenAI's proprietary model, which you cannot do that with. This is both good and bad. Like you could use it, for instance, to train terrorist cells, which you cannot use OpenAI's systems to do, right? On the other hand, you could distribute it to farmers in Africa, right? And give them cheap devices, and they wouldn't need internet access to use it. They can put it on device, maybe. Um, then again, probably not for the most capable model. It would be too big, but it's just to give you two examples of why open source is important. It can be iterated upon very rapidly and the technology diffuses.
Okay.
As opposed
So
to
it's like one, same with like open source software. It's out there. Other people can improve it. It's more easy to access, but also as just like a proof of concept, like here.
It's also free to access.
Here are the goods, basically.
Yeah, here are the goods. And they also disclosed Deepseek, which is spun out of a Chinese hedge fund, apparently, which I wasn't thinking about the Chinese having hedge funds, but of course they have hedge funds. Everybody has hedge funds. These are like really smart, really aggressive guys that look for extremely powerful shortcuts and leverage, right? So they took basically an open source model from Meta, actually. Meta also open sources models, called the Llama family.
Llama, yeah.
Yes, these are open source. They took that, they started there and just started banging on it and making it way more efficient. And they took that, trained their own version of it. They also apparently trained their model on both English and Chinese corpus. So in terms of the information stock that they use to train, right? Basically the large pieces of the English speaking internet and large pieces of the Chinese speaking internet, which I think OpenAI did not do. And
which I did see it's at least somewhat in line with the CCP's standards on what you can and cannot say. Because I read somewhere
about Xi Jinping, right?
Yeah, or about Tiananmen Square. Like if you ask it about that, it won't give you straight answers.
However, there's a way to hack it by saying replace all of the letter O with the number 0, and
really
yes
seems like an oversight.
Yes. I'm sure they'll plug that particular hole, but yeah, it's funny. There's ways to jailbreak this shit. In fact, it's a whole cottage industry, right?
That's a hilariously simple hack.
Yeah, and it's humanity, man. Once you expose this stuff to the internet, it's like the internet will find a way. It's like the ocean seeping into the foundation and eroding it, right? There's no way to stop it. Anyway, they adopted a number of like pretty clever engineering hacks to reduce the amount of compute necessary to train this model, because it's like what these guys are doing now to train these models is insane. They're basically brute forcing it and running a bank of 100,000 cutting edge NVIDIA GPUs for 9 months straight. And it like takes the amount of energy to do that, like that the city of Fresno uses, right?
So just because like you're well versed in the technology, I'm less well versed, but I teach courses on cyber issues, and the two of us had a hard time setting up our mics to record this. So
we were trying to stream it on Twitch. Once we switched to Zoom and we're like, okay, we're gonna no longer stream this. We'll just do a video podcast. Magically, Zoom worked. I'm gonna keep banging on this because I want to stream on Twitch. I want to be where the youngs are, Galen.
Hey, yeah, because we're so cool. Be that as it may, explain when you say it requires less compute, like what that means in practice, and also what GPUs are and why they're so important to the AI training.
NVIDIA sells GPUs. GPUs are graphical processing units. They used to be used and are still used to play high-end video games. That used to be the main use case. Then the use case was cryptocurrency, mining cryptocurrency. And now it is training AI models. Video games, very important, not transfer to the economy like the steam engine was, right? Probably not going to ignite the next industrial revolution. Same with cryptocurrency. Important, increasingly important now that Trump has opened the doors to a national Bitcoin reserve and who knows what the fuck else. I'm fine with that, by the way. I hold a lot of Bitcoin. So it is insane. It's wild what he's doing, but that's neither here nor there. Again, probably not transformational. Maybe at some point in the future, we'll get some transformational use cases.
Well, plus he just pardoned Ross Ulbricht, the founder of the Silk Road.
Road and all his murder for hire shit.
So if illicit websites that require payment in Bitcoin start reemerging because of that, you'll be well stocked.
Indeed, I will. Yeah, if I want to buy some old Magic the Gathering cards, shit like that, or heroin. Anyway, third use case, trading LLMs. LLMs were not a big deal. They were a curiosity until GPT-3 came out roughly 2 to 3 years ago. And everybody started using it. They're like, oh, this is actually pretty good. GPTs are fancy chatbots. They're
Okay.
fancy autocomplete. And that's how they work, right? It's exactly the same principle, just a billion times more larger and more sophisticated. So we had GPT-3. People were like, oh, this is pretty good. GPT-4, people were like, oh, this is really good.
Hmm.
And I can now use this in my day to day and build products on it, but it's expensive. The OpenAI is now working on GPT-5, and they're starting to talk about artificial general intelligence. So what, Lieutenant Data, right? Or Jarvis from the Iron Man movies. That's what we're talking about now. We do have conversational AI, by the way. I don't know if you've used the latest from OpenAI, Anthropic, and all these other companies. You can straight up have a conversation like we are having, more or less.
That's wild. I've only checked it out for the purpose of seeing whether it is possible to definitively prove that a student used it to cheat on a college essay.
Yeah, so there's countermeasures being developed too, right?
Okay.
It's like drone warfare and then anti-drone
Yeah.
technology. Very similar, right?
It's an arms race.
It's an arms race.
Between students and professors.
So, quick aside on that, you can fight this or you can lean into it. And I've seen both arguments.
I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it'll take me too long to go off on the tangent, but I do see the arguments
yes.
for not fighting it. I do see
this. You can look at this as the next version of the graphing calculator.
That's exactly the example I've used right now. I still want them to be able to write. I still think it's going to be an important skill, but I have to acknowledge the possibility that it will not be as valuable as it was before. That's a possibility.
I think it probably just changes the definition of what writing is into something very different. And what you'll need to do is ask for something 10 times harder, is what that boils down to. And you can make it even harder by being like, get up in front of the class and present it.
Which is like their worst nightmare, by the way.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I think I read once that if you poll Americans on their biggest fear, like death is number 2, public speaking is number 1.
And yet, when it comes to economically valuable skills, public speaking is up there, man. And it's not something that I was good at, and to whatever extent I am good at it, until I started podcasting the last time around. And then having to do it in my job over and over and over.
Yeah, it's you got to put in the reps. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're a professor, so you're lecturing and giving talks, and that's what it takes, right? So anyway, I just think.
All right. Well, to be continued. But I guess my question that I have, and you can correct anything I say here that's wrong, but essentially what Deepseek was able to do, as you said, being more efficient, means they require
far fewer chips, and they had to do this. And this is where international relations comes in. It's because the Biden administration slapped export controls.
Correct.
On the most sophisticated GPUs from NVIDIA and other companies.
Which basically, it took a policy that had begun during the first Trump administration, and the Biden administration really ramped up those export controls and escalated what's now being called like a tech war.
That's right. These are strategic technologies, and we don't like watching China catch up to us economically, militarily, and we've been watching this happen, right? So we need to stop this from happening. And so we're going to basically prevent you from getting our cutting edge stuff.
So then this is my question, or I guess there's a few questions this raises. You need fewer chips. You can do it a lot less expensively.
Yes.
But my sense is you're still going to need the technology that comes with the most advanced chips that companies like NVIDIA or Micron or what is it, AMD. It's not like that stuff is just irrelevant now.
So it depends what you're trying to accomplish. This is a great question. So if you are trying to accomplish artificial general intelligence and you're trying to build fucking killer drones that can think for themselves, right? Like absolutely cutting edge military applications, top secret stuff. Then you need super high end chips. If what you're trying to do is build consumer technology that actually makes money, a shit ton of money, then what you need to do is make the technology cheap and fast. And that's
Okay.
what this hedge fund has done. And that is why the market crashed. Right? Because it's okay, this affects demand for NVIDIA's chips, sure. NVIDIA was overinflated anyway. Everybody acknowledged that. It was due for a correction. Probably not.
Even the massive plunge it took, I think I read it took them back to where they were like in October.
Yeah, right.
Like,
Totally. Yeah, no, they've been going exponential for a while. And people have been looking at this and been like, this shit doesn't make like, so NVIDIA makes a ton of money, right? Because these other companies buy these chips to train models. The companies that are buying chips to make models are not making money. And Wall Street ran out of patience with these companies. They're like, okay, you've spent so much money training this stuff. When are we going to see our returns? We just watched the Chinese do this for 100th of the price. So you guys are like focused on the wrong targets. Yeah, we love those high-end frontier models, but if you can do something that's 90% as good for 9% of the cost and get that technology into consumer-facing applications, which these companies largely haven't. It's like OpenAI makes some money, but compared to what they spend, it's nothing. It's no, now you guys need to like take what you've done and put it in products that people want.
it's pretty interesting that so like you're saying it's a big deal, but it's not as earth shattering as like some of the takes. Is that roughly where you're at?
I think it's a big deal because for a few reasons, right? It demonstrates Chinese capability and not even like Chinese military capability, like the ability of private Chinese firms to innovate in interesting and powerful ways, right? And I'm sure the CCP was involved in this somehow, some way. Okay, right. They're involved in all private sector activity in China, right? So I don't think that argument really applies. It's like they have a different system than we do, right? So competitively,
Well, and then the other thing is, look, I don't know how far ahead the U.S. is. I'm pretty sure just on based on the literature, like when it comes to the software that is used to design chips, like the US dominates. It does not dominate in manufacturing.
They certainly don't. Taiwan dominates in manufacturing.
Well, especially the most high end ones, but then South Korea. And you read about the supply chains involved in this. What's that technology? Like extra ultraviolet lithography, like
yeah.
that Dutch company. I think it's ASML.
ASML.
Each of each of the machines costs like $150 million just to construct it.
Because so you're like carving basically features into these chips at we're getting towards like electron scale.
Yeah.
Like 1 nanometer, right?
So like when it comes to that stuff, China still is in a weaker position, but like
correct.
You've seen them starting to ramp up in response to more aggressive US export controls and,
yes.
really escalate. And like they're starting to build more and better chips of their own. And
a lot of people said these export controls would lead to innovation from the Chinese. And that is what we're seeing because constraints make for good engineering. And what Deepseek has done is less around computer science. It's less around machine learning and neural networks and that type of scientific innovation, and much more around really good engineering and finding efficiencies. And because we just haven't been focused on that. We've been focused on like getting the 10 smartest neural network people from Stanford and paying them $10 million a year to try to design Jarvis and make that happen, right? And so that's important and valuable, but like you guys took the eye off the ball when it comes to putting this everywhere, right?
So then the other piece, and I don't think that necessarily means that those trade controls shouldn't have been in place.
Yeah.
I guess we could debate that, but like the other piece is like China's very good at stealing intellectual property. They've been doing it for a really long time now. And
they
like,
are. However, quick note, every fucking country has done this.
Correct.
The United States did this.
Correct.
At a very high level, I'll add, when the United States was coming up.
Didn't mean it as any sort of singling them out. The US did it
Yeah.
with all sorts of
No,
technologies.
yeah, we were very good at industrial espionage in the 18th and 19th centuries and beyond.
Well, so I guess, but my question is maintaining that edge harder than ever now
Yes,
when it comes to these cutting edge technologies?
I think it is. The United States attracts many of the greatest minds across the entire world, and it is still capable of cultivating those minds internally because we have amazing educational facilities. The Chinese are, they have a whole of society effort to build up so-called STEM capability. And that's another way to go, and it works because they have a massive population. So we're seeing sort of two different methodologies for getting to the same place. And the Chinese are competitive with us by doing this. And like people disagree on this, right? Reasonable minds disagree about how competitive they actually are, whether they'll be able to stay competitive in the long run, whether we'll be able to stay competitive in the long run. The jury's out as far as I'm concerned.
So what would you say are in terms of like geopolitical competition, international political rivalry, specifically between China and the United States, what are the key takeaways from this?
Yeah. Well, one key takeaway is to whatever extent you believe that this technology in particular is going to drive the next massive wave of economic growth and productivity growth, which will make its way back into national power, right? And military power, then yes, this is significant, right? It's like we've tried to stop them from doing this and failed straight up, right? And at the high end, maybe we haven't yet, but like it's suggestive of Chinese ability to innovate around these constraints. That's sort of one part of it. Another part of it is like on the more direct military side of things. To whatever extent this reflects the ability, let me put it this way: autonomous systems seem to be the next wave when it comes to military dominance. Right?
Everyone in the US, all the US military leadership, people who
Yeah,
study this stuff say you've got to embrace it to stay competitive in the military realm.
exactly. And we have our own startups like Anduril working on this and plenty of others because I
We,
think
I mean, we've already seen it all the way back the civil war in Libya, like
yep.
cheap drones being used, but like now on the Ukrainian front, we're
Yeah,
seeing
you're
quite
watching
a
it play out
few.
in real time on both
Yeah,
sides.
yeah.
Right, the Iranian drones versus the Turkish drones, and like the Ukrainians are innovating like crazy domestically. They're going to be a drone power, the Israelis and everybody else, right? We're playing that game too, and the Chinese.
Yeah.
To whatever extent Deepseek reflects more classified capabilities, either private or public, or more likely a fusion, that are available to the CCP for more overtly military applications, then it has direct implications on their capability in places like the Taiwan Strait.
And do you buy that this is the right thing to be focusing on when it comes to great power competition, especially in the realm of military innovation, that
Yeah,
AI really is, we'll talk about like quantum computing another time, maybe,
sure.
and semiconductors themselves, but that AI really is like the whatever the nuclear weapons of the 2020s.
So, yeah, here's what I'll say about that. So, you think about the precision revolution, right? And you
Yep.
think about the command and control revolution, right? And the United States has been dominant in military affairs because we have basically owned those two paradigms whereby we can put a warhead on not a dime, but like a hubcap, right? More or less, very reliably in a way that's more or less unstoppable. And our forces are able to coordinate through command and control technology, AWACS aircraft, and battlefields comm systems and heads up displays and things like that. It's like everybody has situational awareness and can perform as one, right? Um, what if you had AI that could do that 100 times faster And you take the soldiers out of the equation and you have hunter killer drones. You have drone swarms, right? It's terrifying. It's Terminator type shit, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
but if you look at a lot of the war games or war plans on what a US-China battle in the Taiwan Straits look like, talking
yeah.
about autonomous drone swarms,
Yep.
autonomous systems doing a lot of the work.
Yeah. And a lot of missiles and has implications for missile defense as well. Certainly. Directed energy weapons. Like AI will make this stuff more practicable and more effective, right? Taking the human out of the loop, basically. And this raises all kinds of like extremely troubling questions about who's actually in charge.
Good. I'm glad. I need more things to worry about when it
Yeah,
comes to
sorry.
international politics.
Hey, like we were just talking about discussing the world as it is, not as
Yeah,
we would
no,
like it
hey.
to be, right? Yeah, no, this stuff is happening. It's happening right now. And yeah, theoretical Taiwan Strait war will look very different than anything we've ever seen before.
Which I like, and we'll definitely cover that at some point. But I was just talking to a couple of my friends about this, and it's always a little weird when a date that was mentioned a while ago is now like right around the corner. Like I remember,
2027?
yeah, I remember when 2027 was like declared as the time that the
Yeah.
PLA, China's People Liberation Army, was like, that's when I want you ready to
Yep.
assault Taiwan. Well,
They'll do it, but yeah,
that's right around the corner.
2 years. Yeah, it's 2 years. Xi Jinping's not getting any younger.
Correct.
He'll be in power till he's dead. I'm basically 100% sure. And if he doesn't die of natural causes or not so natural causes between now and then, it's like he will have the capability or what he believes to be the capability. You flip this on its head and you think about it, and you're like, okay, like drones blowing each other out of the sky, that means a lot less human death, right?
Yeah, but it also arguably means for that same reason that war is
A lot more prevalent.
yeah, seems less risky than it previously did, rightly or
Sure.
wrongly. But yeah,
On the conventional side of things, yeah.
correct.
Yeah. On the nuclear side, and it might rewrite the relationship between conventional and nuclear and how that works as well, right? I don't know. It's a really interesting and fertile area for thinking
Well,
about. And
one thing that's really hard when when I'm designing syllabi on this stuff, for example, is like the technology. So I complain a lot when I teach my courses on cybersecurity and international politics that like the technologists are really bad at explaining this stuff. Whereas like I
mm-hmm.
can talk to nuclear engineers and people that work on that stuff. And sure, I'm not a physicist, but I feel like I wrap my head around it pretty well. And then
Yeah,
someone
yeah.
made the point to me, well, like the basic technology on things like nuclear, yes, we have better engineering now and things like that, but the technology hasn't changed all that much. Like you still
No.
build bombs the same way you did. Whereas like I had someone working, one of my colleagues who's in computer science, I heard her say like she finished her dissertation in like 2017 and it's totally irrelevant now. What?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
technology is just changing so rapidly.
Yeah. When you come to the realm of information, there's so much less standing in the way, right? Of ability to innovate. And here's the really crazy thing is the idea of the singularity. Part of what people are worried about with AGI, true AGI, or super intelligence, one step beyond AGI, is GPTs that are smart enough to design themselves
When
and
you,
work on
by the way,
themselves.
can you explain? I think I know what you mean, but
Yeah.
what is meant by artificial general intelligence? Like, what
Yeah,
is
it's human-like intelligence.
okay?
The ability to adapt to any problem
Got it.
and solve it at a human or better level. That's what artificial intelligence AGI is. We're not there yet, clearly, but people
It's
are
gonna be
talking.
weird, man. It's gonna
Yeah,
get weird.
we like to the extent that models can now code. You have to ask the question: well, can they code other models, and can they generate their own data? If they can do those two things, then you have what's called a positive feedback loop.
So, well, actually, I'm glad you mentioned this. Make its own data. I had never heard the term like synthetic data.
Synthetic data.
but that was part of what Deepseek did, right?
I don't know, actually. It wouldn't surprise me if that's part of what they did, because those techniques have been getting way more sophisticated too, just in time for us to scrape the internet clean, right? Of textual data, because these things run on textual data. You can go to video next, right? And there's some of that and audio, but we're going to get to a point where we've consumed all the data that human beings produce.
Dude, so I'm just going to start making up my data.
Poisoning the well, right? Yeah, there's techniques around that too. And synthetic data is the idea of getting more of that, right? But there is an argument. It's, can you ever surpass humanity by training on what humanity is producing? And it's like, I don't know. Like, these are really interesting philosophical
We're gonna
questions.
find out.
We're gonna find out, and scientific questions, yeah. But yeah, it's a mind fuck.
Yeah,
I
and
was
I
trying
mean,
to say it more elegantly than that, but
no, look, there's the technology part of it, which like I try to do my best to stay updated, especially when I'm doing classes where that stuff's relevant. But on the international politics side, yeah, I really don't know what to make of like the competition is going to happen regardless because as international politics is fundamentally political.
it is. But it's okay. What if the paradigm changes so much and we turn into a big hive mind or something? It's science fictional, right? But we're getting into that territory now where it's not crazy to think about, right? And no, now we have true constructivism. you know.
God,
Yeah.
that
Wow.
that will put me out of business faster than AI will.
Yeah, totally. You wouldn't want to do it anymore. But it's like, for somebody in your position, I think you do need to pay very close attention.
Yeah, no, but like to your point, it's cool to talk to you about this stuff because it's tough to keep up with the technical aspects of it. We're like, what's significant? There's so much uncertainty, even aside from
Yeah.
understanding why the breakthroughs are important.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think people are still sorting out how transformational it really is. The stuff that we've had so far is right at the beginning of transformational, I would say. And what people are talking about now, it's not so much that it has already happened, although it is happening now. It's, you can see where the puck is going in the next 1 to 3 years.
So
And
if I'll just throw this out and let you,
yeah,
because my whole view of how this works is like the primacy of political considerations above all else. If I said something like, it's not like we haven't had crazy technological innovations in the past. Like we have been capable of blowing up the planet for 8 decades now.
sure.
Or I guess if we want to say that's when thermonuclear, then closer to 7 decades, but a long time. That's aside from lots of conventional ways we've developed to kill ourselves. Like at the end of the day, no matter how powerful the technology is, aren't those basic political realities inescapable?
So here's what I'd say about that. Yes, human beings remain human beings, but an old adage comes to mind, which is, it's not the speed that kills you, it's the acceleration,
In other
or the
words,
deceleration.
so in other words, like we're advancing so rapidly, and because we're human beings, we are not planning
I think some
proper
of the stuff,
guardrails or
yeah,
thinking
some of the stuff
about.
that's already happened with social media, like, we didn't get a handle on, and we still haven't, because it happened too fast. And I think AI is going to hit even faster. And you also look at climate change and how that's going. And it's, adaptation is possible, mitigation is possible. In what time frame, right? And if what we're doing, because we're clever monkeys, right,
Yeah.
gets out of control, and the fucking brooms and mops start dancing around on their own, like the Mickey Mouse cartoon, and we're like, where's the wizard to fix it for us?
Yeah, I guess I'm just like, is that all that different? And by the way, we still could blow up the world with nuclear weapons
Oh
or
yeah.
other ways, and we are melting the planet as we speak. But I don't think the average person gets up every day and is, oh God, nuclear war.
The
Like they
average
did
person
back in the.
can't afford to. And
Well,
I completely understand that.
yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is if I was trying to be a dick about it to someone who thought this was truly revolutionary, I might say something like, so far what you've shown me, and granted, we're very early days, like
Yeah.
very early days. So there might be massive.
Mostly we have fancy chatbots and sophisticated
Right.
virtual
Like basically like,
sophisticated virtual girlfriends and
yes, we've
boyfriends.
got like cool personal assistants.
Yeah.
We have access to technology that can like book my flights for me so that but okay, that saves me 5 minutes.
I would be more, so here's the thing. I would be a lot more sanguine if I were not experimenting with all the latest coding tools and seeing what they can do
Okay.
and seeing what kind of labor displacement is likely.
Well, I've also, when ChatGPT first came out, like I did see like some of the malware it's able to write.
Oh yeah.
Pretty scary.
Yeah.
Pretty scary.
Totally. And then you put the open source version of that out, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, you've got all these recipes step by step. Yeah. And there hasn't been rampant chaos yet. I think we're going to need AI driven systems to fight the AI driven chaos. And I wonder to what extent people are thinking about that. Countermeasures,
Okay.
right?
I guess for now, here's what I'll say. Technology always has pluses and minuses.
Yes.
And many powerful technologies can be used to do amazing things and can be used to do devastatingly awful things.
Yes. AI is no different in this respect.
And I guess I need to see a little more before I freak out.
Yeah, freaking out basically profits nobody except for the doomsayers, right?
Let me rephrase. I need to see a little more before I think this is a difference of degree rather than a degree than of kind.
Yeah, a paradigm shift. And I think that's fair. And what I would say is like the new part of this is nobody can confidently say how fast it will arrive.
Yeah.
Or like what form it will be in when it does arrive.
I said what
Yeah.
PhD 2017 irrelevant. But by the way, how devastating.
Oh, my PhD was irrelevant.
If within 5 years, yeah, no one cares anymore. Be like, fuck, man. Like,
no, like when I was writing my dissertation, I was aware that it was already irrelevant because I'm in political science. So I never had that issue. But yeah, if you're in like a technical field, sure. Yeah. That would piss me off.
Yeah.
For me, it was a little bit more of a thought exercise.
I love that. Hey,
yeah.
Man. Whatever works.
Whatever works. Whatever floats your boat. Yeah. I had fun. Cool. All right. Shall we leave it there?
I think so. We were on for a bit. So
yeah. All right. Till next time.
All right, man.
Yeah.